collection, Us Now, Stories from the Quilted Collective. And our first guest is Ayse Sule Akinturk, who was born and raised in Istanbul. She holds a doctoral degree in political science and she currently lives in St. John's. And Ayse's going to be reading from her story, Sky Spy. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much
You're
for having
welcome.
me. The old man takes a quick sip from his steaming Arabic coffee, a well-deserved and delightful break from hours of staring at the sky. Then he slowly puts the coffee cup down. He just can't afford a long break. He has an important mission and shouldn't waste even a single second. He had been around the age his grandson is now when his villagers designated him for the important job of sighting the new moon on the eve of the holy month of Ramadan. They all knew that no one could do it better than him. Even when he was a baby, he would never sleep at night. He would become restless at around sunset and would calm down only under the shade of the moon and stars. Nobody knew which would do the magic trick of bringing a bundle of joy out of that fussy baby, the blinking of the stars or the hide-and-seek play of the moon with the clouds. When he began walking and talking, it became clear that sighting the new moon was his passion, and soon after that he got his designation. Now he's up again, gazing at the cloudy sky and trying to sight that tiny sliver of the new moon. This is his first night away from the village and his first time visiting his son in the big city. After a family dinner, his daughter-in-law, Angela, prepared him his favorite coffee. She was like a daughter and always treated him and his late wife as her own parents, with love and compassion. The old man takes another quick sip, clearing all that tasty creamy foam from the surface of the bitter black coffee. His inner child wishes he could do the same for the clouds. Wouldn't it be nice if he had the power to clear them all with one big deep breath and see what they were hiding behind them? But he is old and wise enough to know that this was not such a good idea. There is a right time for everything, and this is so for a good reason. His instincts were telling him that the right time was about to come. The sky was getting ready for another premiere, a spectacle that no one except the loyal fans could preview. The old man always hoped that his first and only son could one day appreciate and share his passion. But this never happened. Instead, his son turned out to be his exact opposite, and thus his biggest disappointment. Yet, the old man never lost hope and never forgot that justice would somehow prevail. And time proved him right. The old man's first and only grandson also turned out to be the exact opposite of his own father. And here he was, happily sitting next to his beloved grandpa. This little boy's silence, patience, and big dark eyes, which he would hardly blink so he wouldn't miss a thing in the infinity of the sky, all of these and other things remind the old man of his own childhood. They give him all the reasons to believe that his privileged yet painful solitude as a sky spy is finally over.
So beautiful. I love this story. I love this story. It's such an elegant and encompassing look at a story that we've heard a lot, but an engrossing look at cross-generational conflict or difference, specifically in your story in a Muslim family, and not just with age, but with countries, faith, technology. You managed to spin so many things in there, and I'm just wondering what inspired you to write this story of these men, and how is it, if at all, how does the story of these two men parallel your life, your experience?
Well, I'm an immigrant to Canada myself. I moved here about 20 years ago, and I'm a mother myself, raising a child born here. So this intergenerational gaps within Muslim immigrant families is something that I experience on a daily basis. But what truly inspired me about this story is my own relationship with my own family, especially my own father, who passed away when I was only 20 years ago, suddenly. And my biggest regret since then was that why I didn't take time and effort to sit down and have that deep connection with my father, listening to his stories, why he made the choices he made in his life. Were they really choices to start with, or they were things that he had to take in his life journey? So that regret about not having taken the enough time and effort to listen to my own father's story and to reflect on what part of his story made me who I am today. That is that lack of connection, that lack of communication made me reflect on the need of everybody, actually not only myself and my family, but every human being, to reflect on who they are, why they are, and what part of their being had something to do with their previous generations, with their ancestors.
Is that your father coming out in that character in that regard, that peace and that grace of transition?
Partly so, but I think there is also this element of people living and growing in rural areas have much deeper connection with the nature. They have their pace in living their lives is much slower and more peaceful than ours, who are struggling every day the challenges of living an urban life. So his connection with the nature makes him more calmer, more peaceful, content, maybe have a long-term perspective in life, not rush into conclusions so much. But when you read the piece, you will also see that he has his own fair share of making the wrong assumptions about who his own son happened to be.
Right. I just love the story, and I'm wondering, are you going to keep writing? I know that you said before we started the interview that you wrote 4 stories as part of the Quilted Collective. Are you going to do more? A novel,
yes,
perhaps?
I'm certainly looking forward to it. Yes, English is not my native language, so it requires extra effort on my part to kind of translate my emotions and experiences from one language to another. But the more I start thinking, dreaming in English, I think the challenge will be overcome.
Well, I just love your writing, and I can't wait to see what you do next. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we'll be right back with our next guest. Our next guest is Richard Elcock, who was born in Toronto, Ontario, and raised in Mississauga. He is of Afro-Barbadian and Afro-Jamaican descent, and aside from Canada, he has resided in both the West Indies and across the USA. He's currently based in St. John's and has a penchant for international cuisine, health and wellness, and travel. And he's going to be reading today from his story, Homecoming. Hi, Richard.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, delighted. I'm really glad to have you here.
Thank you. All right, so without further ado.
Yeah, let's do it.
Homecoming. Her brown eyes are bright with anticipation as she walks with a quickened pace down the weathered concrete steps from her bedroom to the front room. The scent of hibiscus wafts through the window in the hall, and she turns to glance out at the tropical landscape rife with palm trees and lush vegetation. Her supple and wrinkled deep ebony skin gleams with a glow imparted by a generous application of cocoa butter, warm and fragrant. She strides broadly from her bedroom and makes a sharp right turn into the front room of her home. She seats her proudly rotund figure on the red velvet settee in her favorite spot, which welcomes her familiar frame. She sighs, then rubs her hands through her shortly cropped and thickly textured afro hair, jet black with a shock of gray to the left of her forehead. She relishes the scent of castor oil on her worn yet strong hands and inhales the scent deeply before massaging the remnants gently into the skin of her forearms. Her heart-shaped face boasts lines around the corners of her mouth and eyes, beautiful lines from years of joy and sorrow. It is colored with the slightest touch of rouge, not too much. She wrings her hands with excitement as her full bosom rises and falls with each breath. She looks regal in her navy blue dress, flecked with a subtle floral pattern of pink and yellow buds and green vines. She adjusts the light linen fabric to her frame. The sweet scent of her perfume is pleasant, yet admittedly foreign for her, as it is only applied for the most special of occasions. She has never been one for finery, but today is a special day. It has been 9 years since she last saw Grant, Joyce, and their son, her grandson, on his first birthday. She hasn't yet met her 6-year-old granddaughter, Rashida, and she cannot wait to hold her close. The Parisian rose-scented perfume gifted to her by one of her grandchildren based in the United Kingdom wafts through the entire room. A gleaming white smile spreads across her face with the recollection of time spent with family, laughing, sharing, and of course, eating. The sound of gravel crunching under the weight of a truck's tires grows louder as the vehicle approaches. It must be them, finally, here to spend summer with Grandma and Grandpa in Bimshire. She stands her 5'11" frame upright and pulls firmly on her dress as she moves to the veranda. Her yellow, size 10 house shoes slap loudly against the linoleum floor and then down the concrete steps, leading out to the front gate of her home.
You write with such incredible, crisp images. It's like you really paint the picture visually of the world. It's just gorgeous, gorgeous writing.
Thank you.
And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that choice and in particular how that marries with your intent in the story and what you're trying to talk about in the story.
Absolutely. So certainly the story was very much so reflective on my own recollections of meeting my grandmother for the first time.
Wow, amazing.
So although my parents had brought me back to the island to meet her when I was 1, obviously I had no recollection of the same.
Right.
So I went back at age 10 and absolutely that left a very huge impression on me. And so much of that trip I remember spending time in her room, just getting to know her.
Right.
And I think the language that's used in this speaks to the warmth and the infection, the true affection that just really came from meeting her and feeling immediately embraced, an immediate point of reference with someone who you'd never met before, right? I think in turn, what I tried to do in the first part of the piece there was maybe have her kind of relay in her own words what that love and affection for me, having not seen me since I was an infant, now meeting me again at 10, was perhaps like for her. Right. Not to mention having not met my sister before either. Now we're at 6, right? Yeah. So I guess the flip of that then is perhaps maybe even the space I find myself in now as I approach middle age, realizing the aging and the mortality of your parents and how much longer do you have them around for. And I really wanted that intimate conversation between spouses to occur between my parents and what would that look like. Kind of noticing my grandmother's aging. And certainly that's what the latter portion of the piece looks like.
I found myself in the latter portion wondering how appreciative Eileen might be about their worry. Like, is she worried about herself? How is she connecting? Is she,
Yeah, quite honestly, no.
She's doing great.
I think my grandmother spent so much of her life caring about everybody else in her community, and she was the last person she thought of. She was very much so the community counselor, if you will. If you had a problem, you'd come to her, directly to her room, be embraced, be fed in her kitchen, and be counseled as well, and that's very much so who she was. She was also very resolute on the fact that when it is your time, it is your time. So she was going to choose to eat whatever it was that she had always eaten and enjoyed, regardless of what the doctor said.
Sounds like my grandmother.
There we go, right?
Yeah.
So that was very much so that, absolutely. But a lot of love, a lot of laughter, a lot of food in that household. And being able to get back at least twice to the island before she passed at age 87, very, very fond memories indeed.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great opportunity. Yes.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Guest is Sobia Shaheen Sheikh, who is a social worker, educator, researcher, and anti-racist feminist activist from St. John's. Welcome. And Sobia is going to be reading from her short story, beautiful short story, Softly with Niyat.
Thanks, Robert. Your question. You wonder, why don't you leave? How can you protect your children if you stay? And how can you protect them if you leave? What will your children learn? What will they think of you? Those are the questions that loom. Why don't you leave? That question nags you. Why don't you leave? You fear that it is because you are battered, shattered, that you are weak, but you are kind and capable and smart. You sometimes even believe that it is in your skin, in your hoon, in your social DNA. That is what people who don't know you say. People say that you are not like them, that you are meek and weak. People say you come from violence. Your mothers and sisters cannot protect themselves, and your fathers and brothers dominate. That is what you hear through pursed, smiling lips and narrowed, condescending eyes when you usher your daughter to the principal's office to get a hall pass after a doctor's appointment, as you wave through the Windex streaked glass walls of the principal's office. That is what you hear on the blurry, crackling dots of the TV. That is what you hear from your daughters and sons parroting this land in which you don't belong. But you secretly fear that you don't leave because you can't face people's disdain. And if you leave, you will prove that people are right. That then they would be right. You are a victim. And if people are right, they are right that you are not strong, but you are kind and capable and smart. Your daughters are DNA doomed to be weak, but they are kind and capable and smart. And your sons are DNA doomed to be monsters, but they are kind and capable and smart. Yes, you know that the leaving is impassable. You know that you will be alone in this land in which you don't belong. You will not feed your children. You know people will not give you a chance to prove you are not a victim, and people will not believe you are capable of living without abuse. You hear the stories of other women who have left. You are not stupid. You have samaj. And you know what happens to women like you, women who are thought to be weak. You know people won't let women like you be strong. And if women like you show that you are strong, people will assault you, then blame you for being weak. So you pride yourself on being a survivor and a savvy pragmatist. You live your life as if you are not a victim. Your heels click-clack on the footpath softly with niyat and determination. After all, if you are weak, how are your daughters and sons so kind and capable and smart? You teach your children how to survive, how to navigate and negotiate and barter against unfairness. Like the time your daughter comes home from school in grade 3, angry and ashamed with puffed eyes, and tells you that she's ugly and that her red couture skin is too dark. You know you cannot help your daughter unhear sing-song racist jabs. As you rage with soundless cries, you teach her that hate can be softened with embroidering of fuchsia thread on a silky turquoise Punjabi kapra sewn deliberately and with love, just for her. You teach your children sabr, but you know that patience is not an acceptance of unfairness. You teach them humility, even as you worry. It can be used to keep them small. You teach them that living life fully is to intentionally make the space for violence as small and as tiny and as insignificant as you can. And the only way to do this is to love, to hope, and to live. You teach them in the ways you hold space for your daughters and sons to make amends. You show them how to live life fully in the spaces between and amongst the pain. And that is the answer to your question. You are a good mother.
It feels in the story that you're trying to, is it fair to say that you're trying to upend some preconceived notions on what the experience of living in a violent domestic situation is like? And if so, what are those?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the story isn't just about, intimate violence in a family or in a relationship between a man and a woman. It's also about other types of violence that happen to women who experience violence in the home, women who are racialized, and in this case it's a Muslim Pakistani woman experiencing that kind of the different interlaced forms of violence. And the idea that victims or people who experience these things are one thing, which is victim.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really what I was trying to unpick and unpack was, I hope I did in the story, was that the victimhood is not, how we understand how these stereotypes of people who experience violence, but especially in, 2021 about Muslim women, it's much more complicated and nuanced than that. They are agents, they make decisions. And that was really what I was trying to unpick there.
Right. Agency. And the complicated decisions that are...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you make
And the
that
humanity
clear.
of that, right?
I think you make that clear. One of the most affecting things about this piece is your choice to write in the second person. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Well, actually, I've been working on this story for a very long time.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed to say how long. But I wrote it as a part of a non-fictional piece for an academic place, where it was a sort of it was taking a composite. It was sort of ethnography, but also taking it as a composite of other experiences I'd heard over the years in working in violence prevention many years ago. But what ended up happening was I took a course with Lisa Moore, that 6-week course, and it wasn't working in my academic article. It just wasn't going anywhere. It was very frustrating. And anyways, we had an assignment to do something, and one of the choices was second person. And I really think that really gave me freedom to write the piece in a way that was, as if this woman who I'm describing is somebody intimate to her life,
right.
Who can now speak about her insides, or it's like a best friend, or these kinds of things. It really gave me a lot of freedom to really consolidate and play with this notion of victimhood.
It implicates the reader in it as well. Mm-hmm. It's beautiful, beautiful choice.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this story, and thank you for joining us today. I wish we had more time to chat about it. I just love this piece.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks very much for joining us, and we will be back with more Ochre Fest 2021. Just want to offer one big final thank you to Ayse, Richard, and Sobia for joining us today. And to close out today's show, we have another beautiful song from Andrea Monro.
This is a song I wrote during the second shutdown of the pandemic. And just one day I realized that the kids were actually thriving and doing fine. And I felt very, very stuck and couldn't quite figure out why. So I wrote a song about it. I think a lot of people were feeling the same way. The city is quiet, the silence has grown like an old clinging vine on a fence post. The kids that once played in the park sit at home and look at the world through a window, and they seem to cope like they just don't know that the world could be anything different. And so you give up and open a bottle of wine and eat standing up in the kitchen. It's hard to slow down when the habit's been made and you've spent your whole life in a hurry. Nowhere to run when you hide from yourself. You end up crawling back saying sorry. And you try to make up with your heart and your soul, will be cast off to stick in the branches. Like a flag it will wave, yellow and brave, to remind us that everything passes. And you read online that now is the time to connect with the things you've been missing. But you give up and open a bottle of wine and eat standing up in the kitchen. Yeah, you give up and open a bottle of wine and eat standing up in the kitchen. Yeah, you eat standing up in the kitchen.
The following program